Hello, I'm Jennifer Byrne. Welcome to another edition of Foreign Correspondent. Tonight, China's Children of the Revolution, a meltdown in the Swiss Alps, and the Big Mac versus two bankrupts, England's longest legal case. And now to this week's World in Focus and the beef over the burger that's got the works. The fast food chain McDonald's is proud of its reputation and goes to strenuous lengths to protect it, as two obscure vegetarian London activists learned to their cost. They were sued by McDonald's for libel after they handed out leaflets criticising the company for everything from selling unhealthy food and exploiting children to causing the destruction of tropical rainforest and cruelty to animals. It was the longest ever English trial, and although McDonald's scored a technical win, it was a public relations disaster for the company. A documentary about the McLibel case, as it became known, has just been released in Australia. And in a moment, we'll be speaking with the director, Franny Armstrong. But first, a couple of extracts from Franny's film.
Even though, you know, we were being told it was like a virtually impossible battle, me and Dave decided to carry on and fight it anyway. Come what may, really.
McDonald's hired top libel expert Richard Rampton QC at about £2,000 a day, as well as a junior barrister and about 7 solicitors and clerks from a leading city law firm. Dave and Helen were representing themselves. The court is in session almost every day, so Dave and Helen must use whatever time they can find for legal preparations.
You doing the cross-examination today, are you? Or am I doing it? But who's starting?
You can start. I'm not ready.
Okay.
As per usual. Mind you, are you ready? I mean, I read all through Alini's statement and
Right. Check the wage slip.
and Ray Cohen's as well. Yeah, and I was looking at the wage slips, but I'm sort of halfway through doing a chart, but I was completely exhausted and I couldn't finish it. I had to go to bed. Not too late. Normally, if campaigning against a multinational, if you ever get to speak to somebody, it's a PR person and they can just trot out their glib answers. Whereas when you've got an executive in the witness box, they can't walk away. You know, they have to answer your questions. So it is a unique opportunity to get information about the inner workings of a huge multinational company out into the open.
Mr. Justice Bell took 2 hours to read his summary to a packed courtroom. Helen and Dave had not proved the allegations against McDonald's on heart disease and cancer, food poisoning, starvation in the Third World, rainforest destruction and bad working conditions. But they had shown that McDonald's exploit children with their advertising, produce misleading advertising, are culpably responsible for cruelty to animals, are strongly antipathetic to unions, and pay their workers low wages. He ruled that Helen and Dave had libelled McDonald's, but as they'd proved many of the allegations, they would only owe 3/5 of the claimed damages, £60,000.
Franny Armstrong, thanks very much for joining us. Why are these two people smiling? They've half the allegations have been found that they did commit libel, and £60,000 fine. What's to cheer about?
Well, McDonald's original aim in bringing the case was to stop the information in the leaflet getting out to the public. That was the aim in suing Helen and Dave, to stop the leaflets being produced. But obviously, as a result of the trial and the very famous website McSpotlight, and indeed our film, everybody in the world is talking about, you know, McDonald's and what they're up to, their business practices, how they treat their animals and their staff, and their nutrition, and all the things that McDonald's didn't want us to know, now well and truly out in the public domain.
What was it about these people? They seem, I mean, they were just ordinary folk, I mean, living fairly obscure lives. Where did they get that grit?
Well, McDonald's have, over the last 15 years, have sued all sorts of people in the past, including people like the BBC, really big organisations, and everybody up to this point has backed down. Helen and Dave were the first people who ever went to trial to defend the allegations that they'd made against McDonald's.
Are they entirely sane?
I don't know about whether they're sane, but Helen and Dave are certainly the two most stubborn people in the whole world.
Why did the likes of BBC, do you think, not want to go near it? Was because they had, as you said, been sued by McDonald in the past and people were frightened?
Well, I think that's exactly it, yeah. I mean, pretty much every media organisation has been sued or been threatened with legal action by McDonald's, and it's created a climate of self-censorship.
Is it, to your mind, a documentary about McDonald's or about free speech?
Well, this trial has never been about McDonald's. I mean, they were just used as a symbol of all multinational corporations and, you know, all organisations, you know, trying to, putting their own profit, you know, before everything else. So, you know, the film and the trial is not saying, you know, don't go to McDonald's, go to Burger King instead. Of course not. It's saying...
It doesn't exactly encourage you to go to McDonald's, though, does it?
No. But this is about, you know, reconsidering, you know, multinational corporations and whether they're good for the world, whether we want them, you know, whether there's a better way of going about things. You know, should you support McDonald's and all the money, all the profit goes to a small group of people, or should you support your local community shops?
Though there are some very actually funny moments in the documentary. I think one of my favourites is when, quite early on, when McDonald's has infiltrated this group which is handing out the leaflets. And I think at one stage there are more spies in this environment group than there are participants.
Well, not only that, but McDonald's had employed two different teams of private investigators, two companies, but they hadn't told each of the companies that the other one was there. So there was this classic moment in court where one of the spies is, you know, giving evidence in the trial, and it's read out from his notes, and it says, you know, so-and-so is sitting at the back taking notes, looking very suspicious. And what he didn't know was that was another spy.
Very interesting piece, and in fact, it was the court upheld this. They'd said that, in fact, the McDonald's ads did exploit children. Interesting piece on Ronald McDonald and when he goes to, ironically, in fact, to Dave's child's school. Were you surprised that the court, in fact, upheld that exploitation of children? No,
I wasn't surprised in the slightest. I was more surprised when they didn't uphold some of the other things. But the judge also said something very interesting when he read out his verdict, which is he said, of course, it's not just McDonald's who are exploiting children with their advertising. You know, you could say that it's any advertising or, you know, a lot of advertising is exploiting children, but McDonald's bought this case and it's McDonald's I'm looking at.
Helen and Dave are pushing on, even now. I mean, they're not paying the £60,000, as you say, but they're going to the European Court of Human Rights. Haven't they had enough victory?
Well, Helen and Dave are never going to let McDonald's off the hook on this one. I mean, they're going to keep pursuing it. As you say, next is European Court of Human Rights, where they're going to argue that because they had no legal aid and because there was no jury, it means that the trial was unfair and the verdict should be overturned.
So have you finished with Helen and Dave, or you're going to be as dogged as they?
Well, I hope I finished with McLibel. I can't say I'm as obsessed as they are.
And there is, of course, the internet, which I think it's actually been shown on the internet, isn't it, the film?
The film, you can watch the whole film on the internet, yeah. But there's also the McSpotlight website, which is the about the trial, and it's got all the transcripts from court and all the witness statements, and there's also this part called the debating room, where, you know, McDonald's aren't unionised in general, so all the workers from McDonald's all around the world are all in there discussing their conditions, and so that website goes from strength to strength, and that still goes.
Well, listen, it's a fascinating film, and it's very funny in parts. Thank you very much for coming in, Franny Armstrong.